The last part of the notes on neurons is drugs' impact on synaptic transmission. So drugs can do a number of different things. When we talk about drugs, we're talking about legal and illegal drugs. A drug is a drug. It doesn't matter whether the government says it's legal or not. So the first thing a drug can do is mimic the neurotransmitter and produce the same effect. So if you see right here, if you remember, we just talked about how neurotransmitters are like keys that open up. So, neurotransmitter hits, it opens up the gates, and then that neuron fires. Well, a drug can act just like that neurotransmitter and do the same thing. So here's a drug, it opens it up, and the neuron fires. The second thing a drug can do, it can block the receptor site on the receiving neuron and prevent the effect of the neurotransmitter. So we see that here. So here they kind of get stuck in there, but it doesn't open the lock, right? So nothing's firing here. This is not firing. So it blocks it. And what that does, it keeps all the neurotransmitters in the synapse. It keeps it in that gap, which, depending on the neurotransmitter, it allows you to, get that feeling more. So if it's like dopamine or endorphins, so it keeps that in there so you keep that high longer. The third thing you can do, drugs can block the reuptake of the neurotransmitter, increasing the effects of the neurotransmitter. So the third thing, so remember we talked about all the excess, or go back to the neuron that just fired it. The third thing a drug can do, it can block the reuptake. And what that does is what I just mentioned. It keeps all these neurotransmitters in the synapse, and then you can feel that feeling longer. Some drugs work on receptor sites. So pretty much what we are just talking about here. Some drugs are shaped extremely similar to a neurotransmitter, and like a copy of a key can unlock the receptor sites. And so we see that here. So the red is the drug. It's almost like the neurotransmitter. It's kind of like Tetris if you guys have ever played Tetris. So it fits in there, not perfectly, but almost good enough to unlock it. So if you think about like how like a school might have a master key, so it doesn't look exactly like the key to my room, but it's close enough where it can unlock my door. So a couple vocab words to know. We have agonist and antagonist. So first, an agonist, they fit receptor cells well and mimic the neurotransmitter causing action potential. So this is a drug, an agonist is a drug that it looks very similar to a neurotransmitter and mimics it, right? So this would be an agonist. So it's going to open up the gate and have the neuron fire, causing action potential. And then you see the positive ions rushing in as the gate opens up. An example of this would be nicotine. Nicotine is a drug that's an example that mimics a neurotransmitter. So like we said earlier, some drugs do different things. Some drugs are shaped like neurotransmitters, but do not unlock the receptor site, thus blocking it from receiving a natural neurotransmitter. These are called antagonists. Right? They fit the receptor but poorly and block the neurotransmitter, stopping the action potential message. An example of these are beta blockers. So if you see this one, it fits, right? So it fits into that hole, but it doesn't fit well enough to unlock it. So now this stays shut and that neuron is not firing. So like in beta blockers, it blocks the neurons from firing. And once again, this is an antagonist. So natural neurotransmitters are like a key to a lock. They bond to the receptor site by unlocking it. So I'll give you some close-up looks of it. So this is what a neurotransmitter looks like, right? So you notice it fits in there perfectly to the binding site. So the colored thing would be the neurotransmitter. This would be the binding site. Notice how it fits in there perfectly. So once again, an antagonist fits in there, but barely, right? So it blocks it from firing again. So it's like the wrong key. It'll fit in, but it won't open the door. And then the agonist mimics the neurotransmitter. It fits in there almost perfectly. It's just kind of like a copy of a key or like a master key, and it will unlock it. So this neuron will fire. So the last part of this, we're going to talk about a couple different neurotransmitters. I'm going to talk about these five. Your book talks about a few more. I'll give you some charts and some handouts that'll talk about a few as well. I just focus on some of the main ones. There's, your body has a lot of them. We're just going to talk about the top five or six. First one we're going to talk about is ACH. ACH does a lot of different things, right? So it's involved in muscle contractions and it's involved in learning and memory. And so it depends on if you get too much of it in your system or if you have too little of it in your system, it does different things. So depending on whether you're blocking it or exciting it, what it's going to do. So one thing you can do to cure a frog is found on poison tree frogs. And what this does, it actually blocks the ACH receptor cells. So if you remember, this deals with movement. If it blocks it from firing, therefore paralysis happens. All right, so paralysis happens with this because movement, you can't move anymore, it becomes paralyzed. So there's a poison tree frog. I'm sure some of you guys have heard of it before, and that's what it does. Another thing that acts similar to this, if you guys have ever heard of Botox before, so what that does, butylin is actually a poison that's formed in different things, actually like improperly canned foods, and they realized, hey, we can use this in small dosage, and so they developed it and they made it into Botox, which they actually inject it into people's usually face, and so it tightens up your face, it paralyzes it, so it paralyzes your face and gets rid of the wrinkles. So when people put Botox in their faces, they're actually putting poison in their faces, right? So they're paralyzing their face. The other way, the opposite way ACH works is through like nerve gas, or if you've heard the black widow spider, because what these do, they actually mimic ACH. And so what that does, it's like too much ACH firing. And this leads to severe muscle spasms and possible death. Right? So like with the Curie frog and Botox, where it stops the ACH from firing, so you have paralysis. Nerve gas and like black widow spider venom does the opposite. It fires it too much, and then you have all these spasms, and you can actually die from it. Cigarettes also deal with ACH. Cigarettes and nicotine work on ACH receptors by mimicking ACH. So it can artificially stimulate skeletal muscles, leading to a slight trembling movement. So if you ever notice smokers, a lot of times their hands tremble, and this is why, right? Because it's mimicking those ACH receptors, so they get a little, like a little tick or a little tremble. Alzheimer's disease. A lot of you guys have heard of this before. It's deterioration of memory, reasoning, and language skills. What they found is low levels of ACH found in those with Alzheimer's disease. So the other thing besides muscle movement ACH deals with is learning and memory. So symptoms of Alzheimer's, which is like forgetful and things like that, may be due to loss of ACH neurons. So some of the medications to deal with it, so there's no cure for it yet, but some of the medications, what it does, it increases the ACH in their brains to help deal with the symptoms of ACH, or I should say symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Dopamine. Dopamine is involved in movement, attention, and learning, also pleasure and rewarding sensations. So too much dopamine is involved in schizophrenia. So you take a medication called Thorazine and some other medications, so that actually blocks your dopamine because the too much is what is causing like the hallucinations and the delusions. So Thorazine and other medications can block it so you don't have too much. Drugs like cocaine and nicotine actually mimic dopamine, producing pleasure sensations. So, and that's how people get addicted. And what happens is, the drugs mimic these pleasures. So cocaine mimics dopamine. Well, when you have dopamine in your system, you get this high feeling. And so you take the cocaine or whatever drug, painkillers does this as well, and then you get this feeling and then you want this feeling again, so you keep taking. That's how people get addicted. And what happens, I'll talk about this later as well, if your body sees that you're taking this artificial drug that's producing dopamine, then your body stops producing it naturally, and that's how people get addicted, because then you need more and more of that same drug to get that same feeling, right? They say it's never as good as the first time you do it. The loss of dopamine producing neurons is cause of Parkinson's disease. That's why one of the medications for Parkinson's disease is to give L-DOPA, which converts to dopamine to combat this. That's why sometimes you'll see medication, they'll say people with schizophrenia, some of that medication, a side effect might be Parkinson's, and a side effect of Parkinson's medication might be schizophrenia because it's all about this balance of dopamine. Neuroadrenaline, this is just, I'm sure you guys have heard of adrenaline before. It just prepares the body for action, right? So it's that fight or flight response. So when you get yourself in a situation, that fight or flight response, you get pumped with adrenaline, and then your body can move kind of like extreme measures. So I'm sure you've heard of scenarios like the mom who lifted a car off of her child or something like that, right? Because she had adrenaline pumping through her body. I'm sure if you guys have ever, been in that situation, we've all been in that situation where you get adrenaline, you feel like you can do things that you haven't before. I remember one time, I think I was like 8 or something like that. There was like a dog running loose, and I like hopped over this fence, this like 10-foot fence in like half a second, right? Because I had the adrenaline pumping, right? Or one time I was in a car accident and someone yelled fire, even though there wasn't any fire, but I hopped through like a broken window in like half a second. You know, if I tried to do that again, I probably would have cut myself 10 different ways. So adrenaline, just get you pumped, ready for that fight or flight. Serotonin. Serotonin is involved in mood, arousal, and sleep. So we've low levels are involved in depression. So there's medication like Prozac, which works by keeping serotonin in the synapse longer, giving it more time to exert an effect. Right? So this is a reuptake inhibitor. So it's something called the SRI, which is the serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is the medication a lot of times, one of the main ones, or that type of medication for depression. Endorphins control pain and pleasure by blocking the neurotransmitter substance P, which transmits pain messages to the brain. This is released in response to pain. So morphine and codeine work on endorphin receptors, right, involved in healing effects of like acupuncture. So this is what happens when you take pain medication. They're artificially pumping endorphins into your body because when you naturally get hurt, if you know sometimes it doesn't hurt right away, but then it might hurt like an hour later, that's because the endorphins have left your body. Or the runner's high, feeling of pleasure after a long run is due to heavy endorphin release. So when you work out, a lot of times you always feel good, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the main reasons is because when you work out, you're releasing all of those endorphins. So if a drug user takes too much artificial endorphins, then the body will produce less and less of its own, creating withdrawal symptoms for the user, turning them into an addict. That's what I was just mentioning earlier. So if you're taking, especially painkillers, so you see like a lot of professional athletes that get addicted to painkillers, and that's because when you start taking them and overtaking them, your body stops producing it naturally, and you need more and more of that painkiller to get that same effect. So whenever you have, if anyone's ever had surgery, the doctor always emphasizes about watch out for taking too much of this painkiller, because a lot of times they'll give you a very strong painkiller, but it's very easy to get addicted to that. And so the last thing is an activity that we have where you have to create your own neuron. All right, so there's a metaphor for a neuron. So what you're going to do, you're going to label the different parts of the neuron that we talked about, the dendrites, the soma, the nucleus, axon, myelin sheath, terminal buttons, neurotransmitters, and anything else that we talked about. And what you're going to do, you're going to create a metaphor for it. So you're going to label it, and then we'll draw a picture, or I'll explain the details of the project later. But here's an example of what I came up with. So you can't use my metaphor. A lot of people usually use the metaphor of like their work for it. So my metaphor is the post office, how it acts like a neuron. So what you're going to do, you're going to say dendrites. So you're going to say, for me, for the post office, the dendrites are like the blue mailboxes. And then, so I'm going to write blue mailboxes, and then you're going to say why it is, right? Because I'm going to say, because it receives the message, right? So dendrites receive the message. So, I draw a little blue mailbox, label it dendrites, and then I'll say why it is the dendrite. The soma would be the post office, right? Because that house is, right? That's like the house that holds the nucleus. The nucleus would be the filing station. That's like the brains of the operation. The axon would be the mail carrier because they take the message to where it needs to go. The myelin sheath would be like the truck because it gets it there faster and protects it. Terminal buttons would be the individual mailboxes, right? Because that's the final thing that sends it. And then the message itself, the neurotransmitters, would actually be the letters, right? Because that's the message that's being sent across it. So that's one example metaphor. You guys will be creating your own, so start thinking about that. And then I will post on the YouTube channel the Neuron song that goes along with this.